What we do here is go back.
How's it going, everyone, and welcome to episode 85 of the Lost Media Podcast. Today we're talking about the 1939 Alice in Wonderland draft, the original proposed version of Alice in Wonderland that Disney were going to go with. Well, they were going to go with it, but Walt Disney eventually decided to pull the pin on it because it was a much grittier and darker version of Alice in Wonderland, the 1951 version at least, that eventually got made by the studio. And the animation style was a lot finer, which is much tougher to animate. And it was, let's just say, more effort. It had more time put into it. And that's not cost effective, effort and creativity and time put into something. To be fair, this was extremely dark. And just to give you an idea of how dark it was, Alice went into Wonderland and all the characters were bloodthirsty. They were horrible. The Mad Hatter and the March Hare were about to dice Alice into pieces with scissors and a knife. Alice was being attacked by hordes of birds in this version of the film. And towards the end, she was placed on a guillotine. Presumably, it was off with her head, and then she woke up from Wonderland. That's fine. Hey, if I watched that as a kid, that wouldn't be childhood trauma. To be fair, for the time, Disney were going with stuff like this. Dumbo, I think it is, had a really messed up scene with the kid being turned into a donkey and then you never see him ever again. Disney did a lot of these dark things around this time. So this wouldn't have been out of character at all, this version of Alice in Wonderland. I think it's just the cost that stopped it from being made. I don't think it being too dark was actually a big element that went into play of this not ever coming to fruition. But I've been interested in this topic for so many years because just the little stills and the artwork of it make it look so interesting. And playing behind me are a lot of stills in a storybook, sort of a storybook format that show the movie and all the animation that was done on it. No actual animation that was done on it, just drawings, because as I said, way too costly to animate into any sort of scenes or a full movie. And for 1939, yeah, very extensive. Apparently an immigrant who, I forgot which country he was from, but someone who immigrated to the US to work on animation for Disney was one of the chief frontrunners of this. And there was another dude as well, forgot his name, sorry guys. This is a podcast, I should reiterate. I don't get all my facts perfect, and it is done all in one go. So I'm not going to be able to give you every single detail to the nearest thing with this because it's not a commentary video with just audio. I am doing those in the future, but yes, just to anyone that is viewing this for the first time, it is just a podcast. So this guy worked on Alice in Wonderland and I believe Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and then was presumably fired by Disney Studios in 1940. So the people that worked on this were not working at Disney for the 1951 Alice in Wonderland film. This was much closer to the original storybook Alice in Wonderland, and they didn't really want to go with that. They wanted to do it in their own sort of style for the screens and for family viewing. And if you watch the 1951 version, there are some elements of darkness to it, but this feels like more of an animated return to Oz, except much darker and much more gritty. I love looking at the stills of the Hatter shop and all sorts of different, and Alice about to get her head chopped off. I sound like a freaking maniac saying I love looking at that. It's fascinating that they were actually proposed, that this was a proposed idea of the film. I get way interested in these topics when there's a version of a film that's kind of family friendly that was going to be made into a much darker and less family friendly version before it got cancelled. And then they went with a much more lighthearted, or I guess not that lighthearted. Alice in Wonderland is meant to be dark. It's not meant to be the most family friendly thing. It's an original little tale. So there's going to be some dark elements. Everyone knows that all those fairy tales and all those nursery rhymes from the 1800s, 1900s, and even the early 20th century were very dark in nature. There was always someone who got their arm chopped off or who died, and there was never a happy ending for them. I don't know what they were thinking when they came up with them, but I guess that was the point. It was meant to be a real world aspect for kids to kind of grapple. Except this would have given probably the most nightmare fuel, I'm willing to guess, of anything ever made in animation history. That's a big call because there's been a lot of nightmare fuel made. There's been a lot of kids movies that have had very disturbing themes, a lot of TV shows for kids that have had disturbing themes. But I think this, given that it was going to be released by Disney, would have been incredibly disturbing. Just by what I said at the start of this podcast, Alice's head on the guillotine. I hope that'll play behind me in the animatic. Oh, there's animation stills. Just the storybook stills. Yeah, just too much for what's meant to be a kids movie essentially. I'm more fascinated, is there any more from this? What has been released, is that it? Because it does say partially found on the Lost Media Wiki. It's not completely found. Again, it's the same thing with Toy Story. They might have done most of the movie in still format, and there might be, or the whole movie in stills. It was not animated. That's confirmed at this point, because they never spent the money to animate something this costly and this finely animated and finely drawn, very finely put together. Like, it was meant to be an absolute masterpiece of animation for its time. Like, this was, I think, ahead of its time with the style they were going for 1939. It feels, yeah, very ahead of its time with how finely drawn it looks. And it reminds me a bit of The Thief and the Cobbler, a bit kind of audacious, just something that was never going to get made because of how cost effective and just how difficult it looks to make. Forget how dark it is or how gritty and how obviously scary it looks. Alice looks like 2 feet tall compared to the rest of Wonderland in all these shots and all these little storyboard stills. Wonderland just looks like it's towering over her and it's just like gonna consume anyone that enters. It's that kind of like monster world type thing. And yeah, it would have been great for the whole family, great for kids back in the day. Yeah, it's too much. But yeah, I'm really fascinated to see if there is anything else from this original version that is just sitting there in a vault somewhere that's just even just more like, you know, little drawings, like potential sketches that haven't been released yet. I think what has been released is probably a lot, and is enough in some ways to kind of demonstrate what they were going for and what this was going to be like. It's not as though there's a story of Alice being attacked by birds and that's just like written in the plot and Alice being guillotined. There's actual freaking animation, not animations. I keep making this mistake, guys. I can't differentiate between what's animated and what's just a drawing for a storyboard still. I apologize. There's drawings of these. So it's there. It was going to be done. There's proper evidence of the most interesting aspects and most interesting elements of this. I just look at the water bottle and the Mad Hatter and the hair sitting together and just how finely drawn that was just for one still, for one little drawing. And I'm just like, yeah, trying to make this into a moving film, you know, proper animated full-length feature in 1939, very difficult. I hope that one day more gets released from this, but I don't think so. I think what was released so far is all we're ever going to get. Like I said, partially found, it says on the Lost Media Wiki. You can almost mark this as found because whatever else is still lost ain't going to be found probably ever. For something that was made so many years ago, it's very hard to find anything else from something so old from back in the day. But it's a really interesting case of lost media or media that was never properly produced. And you can call it lost media because of what's potentially still lost from this original version. But like I said, any movie, it could be live action, could be animated, that has a much darker version proposed compared to what was actually released. So fascinating to me. So interesting. Especially when there's scenes that were made. And that's what I'm going to talk about in a future episode coming very soon. It is a version of a Disney movie that came out in the late 2000s. Animated movie, not a Pixar one, that had another version made that was like, it felt like it was trying to be a darker version of Ratatouille, like a more gritty, Fearing and Loathing in Las Vegas animated style film. That's like a bit of a hint, sort of, not really. That's what I felt like they were going for with this animated film that I'm about to talk about in a not too distant episode of the Lost Media podcast. But that's all there is to this Alice in Wonderland 1939 short. I hope this was enough for a full-length podcast. I was going to put this in a list video, but I figured it was too interesting to talk about for just a few minutes in a list video. I could have made an extended list video, but I figured why not go back to the 11, 12-minute podcasts, because they did very well a couple of weeks ago when I released them, especially the Disney ones and the Pixar ones. So people want to hear about that stuff. I want to tap into what you guys are interested in. And if this is the first video on my channel you've watched, this is predominantly a podcast channel. I do talk about these topics all in one go, and there's no editing virtually except for the stuff playing behind me in the green screen. However, I am getting into commentaries. By the time I've got 100 videos on the channel, commentaries will be once a fortnight at least. There won't be 2 every 100 videos, which is what I'm at the moment. I just wanted to start this channel up and talk about Lost Media and see where it got me. And so far, it's been really, really cool to see the response of everyone. And just making these, they're so much fun. They're heaps of fun to make. I love it. Thanks for your support, guys. Don't be afraid to comment. Don't be afraid to like. Definitely don't be scared to subscribe. Oh, God. And yeah, I appreciate it. Cheers, guys.